Hi Aries, this is Tisch Aitken, and this is your monthly report for the month of June. We are currently in eclipse season, which means a lot of turning points, a lot of major endings and beginnings. As we begin the month of June, we already have had a lunar eclipse that took place on May 26th at 5 degrees and 26 minutes of the mutable fire sign of Sagittarius. And this lunar eclipse took place in your house of teaching and learning and promotion and optimism. And hopefully this brought to completion projects you've been working on, whether it's been promotion or learning or teaching. But eclipses are very unpredictable, bring major turning points in our lives. This lunar eclipse at the end of May was very emotional. It was a total lunar eclipse that brings things for us to process emotionally. And as we begin the month of June, there are 4 points transiting in the mutable air sign of Gemini in your house of learning and information and communication. Mercury is out of bounds. No, not Mercury. Venus is out of bounds, which means it exceeds the sun's path by declination, and it's not playing by the rules, and it will be out of bounds until June 18th. Mercury is retrograde until June 22nd in the sign that it rules, and there are 4 points in Gemini in the mutable air sign of Gemini going in all different directions. The Sun, which is ego and identity, Mercury, which is communication, Venus is what you value, and the North Node of destiny, where you're meant to go, and karmic experiences and connections. On June 2nd, Venus enters the sign of Cancer, the cardinal, the water sign of Cancer, where it'll be until June 27th. And it's transiting in your house of home and family and emotional foundation. And this is a good time if you're in business for yourself, for sales, and for feeling productive and bringing in prosperity. It's good for finding solace and comfort at home and having security in a very unpredictable time. And on the 3rd of June, there's some nice aspects. The Sun forms a helpful trine to Saturn. Saturn is transiting in Aquarius in your house of groups and networking and social media and friends. If you're trying to promote your own business, this is an excellent opportunity. Even though Mercury is retrograde, there may be things to revise. This is still excellent for networking. And later that day, Venus trines Jupiter at 7:33 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And those are the 2 benefics of the zodiac. Jupiter is transiting in Pisces, in the sign it rules by ancient astrology, in your house of imagination and spirituality. So this is a lovely combination, really nice energy on the 3rd. On the 5th of June, there are more difficult aspects. Mercury squares Neptune in the sky, and this occurs at 3:05 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Mercury is currently retrograde, tricky in Gemini, squaring Neptune, which can be deceptive and confusing. So just knowing that that's happening, but also later that afternoon at 3:45 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Mars, which is the ruler of your sign, opposes Pluto, the planet of power and power struggles and death and rebirth. That can be very combative. Those are the 2 rulers of Scorpio, and that can be contentious energy. So the 5th is a day to lay low if you're able. On the 10th of June, there is a solar eclipse that takes place at 6:53 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and it is a new moon eclipse, and this eclipse is at 19 degrees of Gemini. It's setting off where Neptune was in 2019 and in 2020, when it was going back between approximately 18 and 20 degrees of the mutable water sign of Pisces. So bringing information from that journey, but also eclipses bring revelations in and of themselves. A new moon eclipse is when the moon is perfectly aligned between the earth and the sun, and it blocks off light to the sun's surface, and it brings things to light for us. And eclipses can amp things up. It's like a new moon on steroids. A solar eclipse is always a new moon eclipse, and this is occurring in your house of communication and information. So expect to get a lot of information in the month of June. Write down your intentions. It's not necessarily an ideal day to launch things if you can avoid them, but eclipses are major turning points. There might be things that come in that you have to embrace, whether it's a promotion or a big change that just is inevitable. But it is a time to write your intentions and affirmations, and for you it's occurring in the house of thoughts and ideas. It occurs at 6:53 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Then the moon meets up with Mercury at 8:38 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And the moon goes void of course at 1:38 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time with a square to Neptune. And this can be confusing, but again, can uncover hidden information, which eclipses already do. When you have Neptune involved, it makes it a lot more tricky, but it also reveals the deception. And I can imagine a lot of us are going to be hearing big stories in June and going into July, but particularly in June. And later that night, the sun meets up with Mercury at 9:13 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, giving us more news. On the 11th of June, Mars, which is the planet of action and the ruler of your sign, enters the sign of Leo, where it'll transit until July 29th. Mars will be occupying your house of romance and creativity and children and self-expression. If you're single, it's an excellent time for pursuing romance and creative projects, having some fun. If you have children, you might be doing a lot with them, with activities, or indulging your own inner child and having a good time, which each of us needs to try to do right now as much as we can. On the, let's see here, on the 12th of June, Venus forms a square to Chiron, the wounded healer, and that pronounces the wounds that each of us feels. This for you could be around family or around ego. Venus is transiting in your house of home and family in the sign of Cancer, which rules the home. And Chiron, the wounded healer, is transiting in your sign. So this is a day that, you know, some vulnerability might get triggered, but also to address the wounds. Later that night on the 12th, or early in the morning of June 13th, depending on where you live, Venus forms a helpful sextile to Uranus, and that can be very creative for finding solutions with love and money. And this occurs at 1:38 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on June 13th. But later that day, the sun squares Neptune at 7:40 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And so again, more confusion. It's a mixed bag around those dates, and it's right after the eclipse. And I imagine the emotions and vulnerability, and again, Venus is out of bounds, Mercury's retrograde until June 22nd, a lot of stuff going on. So know that we're all going to need to ground ourselves. A lot of news and information flying. And on June 14th, we have another critical aspect, because at 6:01 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Saturn squares Uranus for a second time, and they square one another at 13 degrees of the fixed signs. Saturn retrograded at 13 degrees of Aquarius on May 23rd in your house of social media, groups, and networking. And it squares Uranus at 13 degrees of the fixed earth sign of Taurus, which is transiting in your house of income and what you value. And the first time they squared one another was on February 17th, and that was the day of the power outage in Texas. So this can be very chaotic energy in our own lives and collectively. Saturn is structure and Uranus is chaos, and we're each dealing with trying to structure the chaos in a very new era, and there are obviously going to be some glitches and challenges with that process, and Saturn squaring Uranus reminds us of that fact, but also reminds us that we have to work hard to contain this new momentum. On the 20th of June, there is there are two things happening. We have the summer solstice that occurs at 11:32 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and that is when the sun reaches its maximum declination in the sky, and this is at its highest point in the northern hemisphere, and it's the longest day, and it's the shortest day in the southern hemisphere, and it marks winter in the southern hemisphere and summer in the northern hemisphere. And it also is a time that we honor what the next few months have in store. The sun stops, and we honor what we want the summer to be in the northern hemisphere and what we want the winter to be in the southern hemisphere. But it is a big deal. And also on that date at 11:06 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Jupiter stations retrograde at 2 degrees of the mutable water sign of Pisces. Jupiter rules Pisces in ancient astrology, and it loves being in Pisces, but it's a very emotional sign, probably the most sensitive of all of the signs of the zodiac, and we feel that energy 5 days before and 5 days after. And again, in eclipse season and with a lot going on, this is going to be a really huge month, I feel. So people could be feeling very emotional, very psychic and intuitive. For you, Jupiter is transiting in your house of spirituality and imagination and the subconscious mind. Pay attention to the messages you're receiving and to your dreams. The solstice occurs with the sun entering your house of home and family, where it'll transit until July 20th. And for you, more focus on home and fixing your environment and finding comfort within yourself. On the 21st of June, Venus forms a beautiful trine to Neptune, and that's very romantic energy. It's very good for you for doing spiritual work, for centering yourself. Neptune is the higher octave of Venus, very beautiful and very selfless. On the 22nd of June, we have more challenging energy because Venus squares Chiron, the wounded healer. Venus is in your house of home and security. Chiron is transiting in your sign in the house of self. So it could bring up vulnerability or perhaps painful issues around loss or family, hopefully allowing you to do some work around that. Later in the day, in the night rather, on the 12th or early in the morning on June 13th, depending on where you live, Venus forms a helpful sextile to Uranus, which helps to bring innovation and creative solutions to financial and relationship issues. And this occurs at 1:38 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on June 13th. Later that day, the sun squares Neptune and brings more confusion, perhaps more deception gets uncovered, and that occurs at 7:40 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Excellent tools to guide you through the middle, ending part, middle part of June in particular. Manifesting, tapping into your imagination. A lot of the Neptune energy so pronounced and the Pisces energy so pronounced will help you get through and manifest in this chaotic and erratic month. And on the 23rd of June, we have the Sun trining Jupiter, which is lovely and expansive and visionary. But also on that date, Venus opposes Pluto. And this could bring endings for you, or perhaps challenges at work, because Pluto is transiting in your house of career and life goals. It could also bring breakups for people, but perhaps it's eliminating things that are no longer serving you. On the 24th of June, there's a full moon that takes place at 7:40 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, actually 2:40 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and it's at 3 degrees and 28 minutes of the cardinal earth sign of Capricorn. And this full moon speaks back to the solar eclipse that took place on December 26th at 4 degrees of Capricorn. Maybe you get more information or you get resolution for whatever you were dealing with in December of 2019. And then on June 25th, Neptune stations retrograde at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Time at 23 degrees of the mutable water sign of Pisces. We feel that energy 5 days before and 5 days after. There's a lot of Pisces energy this month because Jupiter retrogrades in Pisces, which it rules in ancient astrology, and Neptune is now stationing retrograde in the sign it rules by modern astrology. That is a flood of emotions we're all going to feel. For you, again, it's in your house of endings, imagination, and the subconscious mind. You probably will be having very powerful dreams, and maybe you're letting go of certain things that you're releasing or working on. Again, an excellent opportunity to do manifesting work and really to focus on that. So I wish you a lot of luck with everything. It's a very, very intense month for all of us. We begin the month with intensity because May already was very intense. So good luck, Aries. A lot of magic too ahead. Jupiter's still in Pisces until the end of the month in its dignity in your house of imagination. And there's a lot of opportunity for networking with all this third house activity. That's where the solar eclipse is occurring, in your house of communication, getting opportunities to market yourself, to interview, to meet people, to get involved in your local community. But it's going to be chaotic, and Mercury, which I forgot to say, stations direct on June 22nd at 16 degrees of Gemini at 6:01 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So we're also going to have Mercury stationing direct, and it doesn't leave Gemini until July 11th. So we have it a while longer. So good luck. Very busy month. It already is while I do this video. So take care. Thank you, Aries.